Mission Log, Lieutenant Verus Cade, 117th Cadian Shock Troop, Harrow Spire 9, Arrival Phase. The first thing you learn about Harrow Spire 9 is that its sky is older than the planet. It moves like a living thing, tides of soot sliding over one another, and the vox chant of the ship's litany becomes a whisper the moment it touches the cloud deck. I record this because someone must. If you find this transmission, know that everything you think you understand about gravity, prayer, and ash will betray you here. The dropship bucked as we breached atmosphere. Hull sensors shrieked out of range. Their needles fluttered like dying insects. My men, 37 Cadians still breathing after 2 campaigns, tightened harnesses and muttered the catechism of descent. I mouthed it with them, but the words came back reversed through my vox bead, as if someone else inside my throat was speaking them first. Outside the view slit, the storm rose in vast ribs of grey, veined with dull fire. It was not snow, not dust. Each flake of ash hit the hull with a hiss, like blood on hot iron. Grav readings pulsed in waves. One heartbeat we weighed half our normal mass. The next, our boots were nailed to the deck. Trooper Sin vomited black into his rebreather. I keyed the auger. No return from the surface. No beacon from the bastion. Only one signal cut through. An ecclesiarchy hymn, but sung inside out, verses folding back on themselves like broken wings. We tried to jam it. The vox picked it up anyway, embedding it between our pulses. Eyes front, I ordered. We're Cadian. It was all I had. The first impossible sight came then. Through the forward slit, I saw shapes walking above the storm. Not flyers, not ships. Human silhouettes pacing calmly on the boiling ash, each carrying banners of shredded red cloth. Their faces were blank voids. My gunner swore he saw one raise a hand in benediction. Our pilot cut thrusters and began descent toward the coordinates stamped on our orders. Shrine Landing Zone 9-3. My eyes stung. The visor filters showed normal atmosphere, but the air glowed faintly, as if lit by dying candles. We punched through the lowest layer of storm and saw Harrow Spire's surface. Grey dunes stretched to the horizon, serrated like teeth. The shrine complex crouched at the center, Gothic spires blackened with soot. Banners hung stiff as boards. No movement, no heat signature. I unclipped and moved down the bay. We disembark in 2. My voice cracked with static. Even the ship's machine spirit seemed uneasy, its engine runes flickering like failing votive lights. Sergeant Malloran made the sign of the Aquila on his rebreather. No priest on the Vox, Lieutenant. Place feels empty. Shrines don't go empty, I said, but my own hands repeated the sign anyway. We hit the pad with a bone-deep thud. The ramp hissed open, and the storm poured in. A dry roar like a million whispered confessions. Ash coated our boots. In seconds, warm to the touch despite the freezing wind. The shrine steps were lined with robes. Dozens of them, grey-white, standing upright as if filled by invisible clergy. No skeletons, no bodies, just garments shaped like men, mid-prayer. Some even moved slightly, as though still breathing. My troopers formed a perimeter, rifles sweeping. I triggered my vox. Bastion command, this is 117th Cadian landing at 9-3. Respond. Only the reversed hymn answered. Louder now, echoing directly inside our helmets. Malloran bent close. Sir, they're shadows. I looked. The robes had no shadows. We did. The air tasted of burnt incense and static charge. My auger blinked out completely, runes scattering into a shape like a circle of teeth. A distant thunder rolled through the dunes. No storm above, something beneath. "Stay tight," I said. "Form wedge, move to the inner sanctum." We advanced up the steps. Each footfall made no sound. Even the wind seemed to draw back from the shrine. The banners were not cloth at all, but a film of compacted ash, fused in layers, and as we passed they cracked and released faint human sighs. I began to record verbally. Lieutenant Cade, 117th Cadian Shock Troop, classified deployment Harrowspire 9. Planetary surface anomaly confirmed. Possible mass disappearance of ecclesiarchy personnel. Environmental readings contradictory. Ash particulate. I broke off as my vox caught a scream. It came from above. I looked up. One of our servo skulls, blessed relic of a fallen trooper, had followed us down, halo sensors spinning. Without warning, its eye lenses flared crimson. It emitted a string of reversed litanies, then burst into flame mid-air. The ash swallowed the sparks before they touched ground. Every trooper froze. The only sound was the storm whispering our names. I raised my last pistol and whispered back the litany of the last fire. The servo skull fell as a charred husk at my feet, incense still curling from its mouth grill. I logged the timestamp automatically, though the chrono flickered between 3 different hours. Something moved beyond the shrine's doors, just a shift of deeper black within black, but the doors themselves had not opened. "Inside," I ordered. My own voice sounded like someone else's. "Inside, now." We crossed the threshold of the shrine, boots crunching on a floor of powdered bone that had once been marble. My last clear memory of the surface was of the robes outside turning their empty hoods toward us, as if to watch. And then the doors swung shut of their own accord, cutting off the ashlight, leaving only the reversed hymn vibrating in the dark. End of entry. Cliffhanger logged. The shrine doors sealed behind us with a sound like a tomb, locking. My auspex showed a heat map of emptiness, but the vox whispered otherwise. Our names in a child's voice, each syllable slow and careful, as if tasting us. We pressed forward through the nave. Dust motes hung motionless, suspended like insects in amber. The reversed hymn dulled to a heartbeat thrum beneath the stone. Beyond the altar, a blast door stood open, leading to the forward bastion proper. The Mechanicus seals were still intact, but the lock had been sheared from within. I signaled wedge formation. Malaran took point, 2 fire teams flanking. My last pistol felt heavier than it should, as if the planet had turned its gravity up just for me. We stepped into a corridor lined with Imperial pennants. The fabric had turned brittle grey, but the stitching glinted fresh gold. Each banner bore campaign honors for units I'd never heard of. Underfoot, the gratings still hummed with power. Someone, or something, was feeding the bastion's generator. Then we reached the barracks. I'd seen massacres. This was worse. Racks of laser guns stood perfectly stacked. Charge packs slotted, bayonets oiled. Cots were still warm. Mugs of recaf steamed faintly on metal tables. Even a deck of cards lay mid-hand, but no guardsman, not a single footprint beyond ours. The air tasted of burnt incense and static, a prickling on the tongue like copper. Vox noise crawled into my helmet, a childish giggle, then my name drawn out as Viera's. My men stiffened. One whispered a catechism under his breath. It came back reversed through the vox. I forced my voice calm. Sector split. Fire Team Alpha secure the mess and armory. Bravo sweep Medicae and dormitories. Malaran with me to command. They moved, boots echoing hollowly. No echo should have existed. The walls were sound-dampening ceramite. Yet each footfall came back a heartbeat late, as if the bastion itself were remembering us. I keyed my slate, pulling up the tactical map we'd been given from orbit. It showed standard Imperial layouts: upper bastion, supply, chapel, underground magazines. But as soon as I connected to the local cogitator, new layers bled into view. Sealed catacombs branching like veins beneath the ash dunes, areas marked with an old Mechanicus sigil for "Do not breach memory hazard." My slate flickered. For a second the map looked like a human lung cross-section filled with soot. Malloran leaned over my shoulder. "Lieutenant, there's more mass underground than the planet's registry lists. These tunnels shouldn't exist." "Everything about this planet shouldn't exist," I muttered. "Log it anyway." Over Vox, Trooper Hask whispered, "Sir, recaf's still hot, but the mugs are cold. Hands aren't here." Static swallowed him. Then a child's voice repeated, "Hask, Hask, Hask," 3 times, each slower and lower. His biometrics spiked green across my HUD, but he said nothing further. I ordered him to regroup. No response. We moved to command. The doors opened to a small sanctum, candles guttering though no air moved. A parchment still unrolled on the table bore the day's watch rota, written in fresh ink. I brushed it, ash smeared under my glove. But the ink was wet. Malloran whispered, "No bodies. Not even a fight," his voice cracked. "This isn't a battlefield. It's a..." "Confession booth," the Vox chimed again. Now it spoke all of our names in a sing-song rhyme. Childish, but deliberate. It stopped at mine, hung silent, then repeated my mother's prayer backwards. My skin crawled. I snapped, "All units converge on command now." No more splitting Alpha arrived first. Helmets dusted grey though they'd been inside only minutes. One trooper's visor filmed over, as if with frost, but read normal temperature. Bravo arrived minus Trooper Hask. When asked, no one remembered seeing him at all. Their memory logs showed a blank space where his identifier should be. My slate beeped, tactical map updating. The sealed catacombs pulsed red now, like a heartbeat under the bastion. A Vox burst came through without origin. Screen filled with snow, then an image resolved, a screaming face. My own troopers. Visor cracked, mouth open in silent plea, embedded inside the catacomb schematic as if sketched there. For a second it moved, eyes rolling, teeth gnashing at digital ash. The slate vibrated. The scream came through in a pitch too high for human throats. Malloran yanked my arm. "Lieutenant, that's Hask." I stared at the schematic. His face receded deeper into the tunnels, swallowed by black veins that formed the shape of inverted arcolas. My gloves shook. The Vox sang one last childish line. "Find him where the ash remembers." Then cut to dead silence. We stood in the command sanctum, surrounded by warm food and steaming mugs, weapons neatly racked, a map bleeding into something alive. No sign of the garrison, no sign of Hask beyond a ghost inside a schematic. I forced my breathing steady and keyed the log. Lieutenant Varys Cade, 117th Cadian Shock Troop. Forward bastion secured but personnel absent. Environmental anomaly intensifying. Unauthorized subterranean structures detected. Trooper Hask MIA. Possible integration into local data or warp manifestation. My voice cracked on the last word. Malloran's hand trembled on his rifle. "Sir," orders. The slate pulsed once more, like a heart under glass. Hask's face surfaced again, mouth opening wider, and then the entire screen went black, except for a single coordinate deep in the dunes. And in the silence that followed, every mug of recaf in the room went cold at once. Orders from ghosts are still orders. Coordinates from my slate, Hask's screaming face fading into them, pulled us to a lift shaft hidden behind the Bastion's altar. Mechanicus runes etched over the hatch spelled Memoria Prohibita, but the lock had already been forced, the ceramite teeth bent outward, as if something inside had clawed its way up. I gave the sign for descent. My men hesitated. Ash had already begun to drift upward through the shaft, curling like incense. Helmets sealed. Litanies on channel 1, I ordered. Their affirmatives came back garbled, syllables reversed like someone spelling them backward. The platform shuddered and began lowering us into the dark. Flood lamps cut thin cones through air so dense with motes it looked solid. Gravity shifted in pulses again. Our boots lifted a finger breadth, then slammed down as the shaft flexed, like a throat swallowing us. 50 meters down, the walls changed. No longer ferrocrete, but something layered and fibrous. Malaran brushed a gauntlet across it and came away with a single brittle vein. Fossilized feathers, thousands of them, packed in strata like sedimentary rock. They crumbled into grey dust when touched, but reformed in the same shape seconds later. I logged the anomaly. My slate wrote the entry backwards by itself. The air temperature dropped. Helm readout said -20, yet we sweated inside our carapace. Each breath tasted of warm copper and chapel incense. Somewhere below, a bell tolled slowly but without sound. Pressure vibrations, not audio. The lift ground to a halt before a pair of doors 3 stories high. Gothic archways. Reliefs of saints inverted, so their faces stared at the floor. I keyed the lock. It opened without resistance. Doors sighing like lungs. We entered an inverted chapel. The ceiling soared above, but what should have been floor was empty air. The altar hung suspended upside down like a great stone heart, chains vanishing into the unseen roof. Stained glass windows were embedded in the walls, but glowed from within rather than without, throwing color up from the stone like submerged lanterns. Their scenes were wrong. Martyrs offering their eyes, Akalas drawn with 3 wings instead of 2. When I blinked, the images changed to my own squad, dying in poses of prayer. We spread out cautiously. Our boots crunched on a floor of powdered bone, veined with black threads that pulsed faintly, like veins under skin. Each trooper's auspex showed a different reading. To one it was void, to another a dense mass. To me, nothing but the word remember scrolling repeatedly. Then the whispers began. Not over Vox this time. Inside our helmets, inside our skulls. Each man stiffened as a different confession spilled into his ears. Malaran jerked as if struck. Later he told me he heard the voice of a boy he'd left behind on Casa Mirak, begging forgiveness. Trooper Ven muttered a prayer to the throne, and then to someone else entirely. For me, it was my mother's voice reciting the litany of descent backwards, syllables curling like smoke. I forced myself to speak aloud. Maintain formation. Ignore external stimuli. My own voice echoed back reversed. Evitamina noitam rof. A low pulse drew our attention to the altar above. Something hung beneath it, a censer the size of a man's torso, cinder-black metal bound with flaking gold. It swung gently, though no air moved, exhaling a faint grey glow through hairline cracks. Each exhalation matched my heartbeat. I signaled Malaran to cover me, and moved beneath. The glow intensified. Runes flickered across its surface, half high Gothic, half Binharic. Phrases like absolve to remember, and memory is ash. I reached up a gloved hand, but stopped inches short. The heat from it was wrong, cold as void, but burning through my gauntlet. Behind me the squad's murmuring rose. Each trooper now speaking their confession aloud without knowing it, voices overlapping in a broken choir. Some knelt, some clutched their heads. My HUD filled with prayer fragments typed in by hands that weren't mine. Lieutenant. Malloran's voice trembled. It's moving. The sensor was indeed pulsing now, like a heart about to burst. Cracks widened. The air grew heavy with the scent of charred feathers. My slate rebooted and displayed a single line over and over. Breathe it in. I toggled Vox to emergency frequency. Command to all units, hazardous relic located. Possible warp object. Request immediate. Static devoured my words, and in its place came a child's giggle. The sensor gave a final convulsion. Metal shrieked as seams parted, petals opening like a flower. Inside was no incense, no coals. Only swirling grey motes, each glinting like a tiny eye. They rose slow and deliberate, and drifted toward us. Filters sealed, I barked, but my own mouth fogged instantly. HUD flashed integrity nominal, even as I tasted dust on my tongue. The motes moved with purpose, not air currents. They spiraled around each trooper, forming faint halos, then slid through seals as if seals weren't there. Cold rushed into my lungs, a pressure like inhaling someone else's memory. My heartbeat stuttered in time with the sensor's pulse. Malloran dropped to one knee, coughing grey. Ven's visor filled with ash from the inside. My own breath came out reversed, syllables I didn't speak. Somewhere above, the altar chains groaned, as if pleased. I tried to call for fallback, but the Vox emitted only my own confession, played backward. Jdros venk rivend luos I. Grey motes clung to the inside of my visor, spelling shapes I couldn't read. Each one burned a brief image of someone else's life into my eyes. A miner kneeling. A Mechanicus priest weeping black tears. Hask screaming. The sensor's glow deepened to heart red. My auspex spiked, then blanked. A final whisper coiled through the chamber in a child's voice. Now you belong to the ash. The ash is inside us now. It clings to the inside of my helmet, my throat, my thoughts. Since inhaling the motes, every breath tastes of burned parchment. I'm logging these symptoms because they're no longer isolated. Trooper Ven was first. He coughed black grit into his rebreather, then bled the same grit from his nose. Malloran's pupils dilated until his irises looked like ash moons. Every few seconds, his head twitched toward something invisible. Even I see after images, faceless saints etched across my visor, flickering when I blink. They're empty. Hollows follow me wherever I look. I ordered containment protocols. Helm seals double-checked. Med injectors administered. Prayer beads clasped until knuckles whitened. None of it helped. The motes had already chosen their hosts. We tried Vox to orbit. Nothing. The hymn still there, but now overlaid with a deeper note, like a giant organ under the planet's crust. Even our internal channel stuttered. Half our words came back reversed before reaching the next man. I checked my data slate. Harrowspire 9's entry scrolled up in neat administratum cant. Exploited mining world. Decommissioned M41.127. Atmosphere lethal. No active installations. Population 0. Garrison none. But we were standing on fresh footprints. Ours and another set. Smaller, bare, leading deeper into the catacombs. Each print filled slowly with ash as we watched. Malloran muttered, "We're walking over a grave that walks over us." His voice trembled, but he kept his rifle up. We followed the prints through a passage lined with more fossilized feathers, now mixed with something like ossified script. Words formed in the stone. Our squad designations. Our ranks, dates of campaigns. None of us had written them. Ven whispered that the walls were remembering us as we passed. We came to a sealed vault door. Unlike the rest, this one bore fresh Mechanicus cog seals. But they were cracked open from the inside, wax split and runes dripping like melted gold. Above the lock, someone had etched a simple equation. 1 equals 0. I paused to log it. My slate wrote, "You are already logged," then blanked. "Breaching?" Maloran asked. "We're not breaching anything," I said. "It's already breached." Weapons, up. We stepped through into a chamber lit by its own walls. Veins of green light pulsed under translucent stone like buried circuits. Racks of data looms lined the room. Cables dangling like veins torn from a heart. The smell was not of oil or ozone, but of old feathers singed to powder. Every screen flickered different scenes. Ministorum processions, Mechanicus forges, endless ash storms. Then all froze on one image, our squad kneeling before a black censer. Then the image changed to show each of us alone in a coffin of glass. Maloran reached for a console. It hummed under his hand, speaking Binharic in a voice like falling sand. "Lieutenant, it's asking for confessions." "Step back," I ordered, but my own voice came out as a child's whisper. The chamber trembled. A section of wall at the far end shuddered like a heartbeat, dust raining down. The broken cog seals there glowed brighter, then cracked apart. A hidden door ground slowly open, metal screaming like tortured choir boys. We leveled weapons. Light spilled out, sickly green, mixed with pale white, carrying a smell of a scorched iron and wet stone. Inside stood a shape nailed upright to a cruciform frame of steel. A Skitari. Its armatics were rusted, but still functional, eyes glowing faint as lanterns. Dozens of data spikes pierced its limbs, pinning it in place. Thin streams of oil and ash dripped from the wounds. Its mouth was sewn shut with copper wire, but from its vox grill a constant stream of Binharic prayers spilled, fast and layered, like 1,000 voices compressed into one. The prayers weren't random. My helmet translated fragments. The engine remembers. The ash absolves. Memory becomes sin. Sin becomes fuel. Maloran made the sign of the cog unconsciously. By the Omnissiah, what have they done? The Skitari's head twitched toward us. Even Nailed It tried to raise a hand in salute. The Binharic shifted, now splicing in our names, our serial numbers, our unspoken fears. My slate vibrated, displaying not coordinates but a countdown of heartbeats, each beat slower than the last. I forced my voice steady for the log. Lieutenant Varys Cade, forward vault breached. Mechanicus presence confirmed. Unknown Skitari unit found crucified but transmitting active Binharic. Possible key to anomaly. Proceeding to... The door behind us slammed shut. The lights dimmed. The Skitari's prayers rose in pitch until the translation collapsed into a single word flashing across every screen. The Skitari's Binharic poured into our helmets like a blizzard of code. Even nailed to steel, it would not stop praying. I patched my slate into one of the dangling data spikes. The moment contact clicked, a flood of corrupted logs erupted across my visor. Words in Binharic High Gothic, and something older, scrolled in overlapping layers. Storm engine, Memoria fuel, protocol, null 7, do not redeem. Images bled through. A Mechanicus expedition descending beneath Harrowspire centuries ago, tithe priests and tech adepts carrying reliquaries shaped like lungs. A machine buried at the planet's core to recycle unconfessed sin into weaponized ash. The logs ended with a single frame of the expedition kneeling, faces dissolving into grey. Malaran read over my shoulder, his visor flickering. Omnissiah preserve us, they built something here. They built it to remember I thumbed Vox. Command, this is Cade. Harrowspire anomaly identified. Mechanicus artifact, codenamed Storm Engine active. Immediate extraction requested, only static answered. Laced with a faint echo of my own voice, saying the words before I did. I weighed retreat. Every soldier looked at me with ash-rimmed eyes. Their noses bled black grit. After images of faceless saints drifted across my visor whenever I blinked. We could climb back up to the bastion, hole up, wait for orbital strike, if anyone was still listening. Then the Vox crackled. Cade, came a voice. My commander's voice, Colonel Oren, dead 2 campaigns ago on Casa Mirak. Deeper, son. Orders stand. Secure the engine. Malaran flinched. Sir, Colonel Oren's been... I know, I hissed. But the voice continued, now softer, using my mother's cadence. Deeper. You were born. For this, the Skitari's eyes brightened, Binharik shifting to a single repeated phrase. Descend, descend, descend. I made the sign of the Aquila, with fingers shaking inside my gauntlet. Retreat was no longer an option. The planet itself was calling us down. A freight elevator waited beyond the chamber, huge enough to carry mining drills, its platform dusted with a thin crust of ash. Cables disappeared into a shaft that seemed to have no bottom. Warning runes across the gate read, Protocol Null 7. Entry absolves. We loaded on in silence. Each trooper avoided the other's gaze. The ash on the platform shifted, as if stirred by unseen feet. I keyed the control. The gate clanged shut, and the elevator began to descend. At first it was almost normal, grinding chains, the smell of oil and incense. But the ash started to behave wrong. Instead of settling on the floor, it rose in tiny spirals, floating upward like reverse snowfall. My stomach lurched. HUD altimeter spun nonsensical numbers. Malaran muttered a litany under his breath. It came back reverse through his vox. Trooper Venn pressed a palm to his visor, as if to hold something in. Our shadows no longer matched our bodies. Each lagged a half second, moving on its own. The shaft walls glimmered faintly. Fossilized feathers gave way to embedded skulls turned inward, mouths open in silent hymn. Cables snaked between them like veins. My slate pulsed a heartbeat against my thigh. Cade, the Vox whispered again. Almost there. Secure the storm engine. Null 7 absolves. The voice was now a chorus of every officer I'd ever served under, each syllable climbing in pitch until it became a child's giggle. I gripped the rail hard enough for the metal to creak. Hold formation, I ordered. Eyes front. Weapons hot. My own voice echoed back delayed like the shaft was learning it. The elevator shuddered. Ash streamed upward in thicker ribbons, clinging to our boots, then lifting off like grey smoke. We began to feel lighter, our gear drifting, chains rattling without cause. Lieutenant, Malaran's tone was a warning. His boots had left the deck, toes brushing air. My last pistol floated at my side, tethered only by its lanyard. Gravity reversed. The entire platform lurched upward, not down, as if the shaft had flipped. Chains snapped taut above us. The lamps flickered and died, plunging us into darkness laced with green pinpricks. My stomach slammed into my ribs. Helmets clanged as troopers tumbled. I reached for the emergency brake, but my fingers passed through the lever, as if it were ash. The Vox screamed in Binharik, 1,000 voices shrieking, "Welcome home." Then the elevator plunged, not downward, but into the ceiling, dragged by invisible force. We were flung against the deck. No, the deck was the roof. Everything inverted. Sparks spat from the control panel. The last light showed ash streaming past us like an upward waterfall. Malloran's face twisted. Inside his visor. "Sir, lights!" They cut out completely. We fell or rose into blackness, weightless, our own reverse prayers echoing off skull-lined walls. We hit the bottom like coins dropped into a well. Or maybe it hit us. In the dark, the shaft had no up or down, only a pressure that pressed from every direction at once. My helmet lamps flickered, then stabilized into a thin green glow. The elevator lay twisted against a wall that should have been the ceiling. No chains, no brake, no sign of where we had come from. Ash moved around us like water, not drifting now but flowing in silent currents, eddies spinning about our boots. It had weight. Every step felt like trudging through a shallow river of bone meal. My vox hissed with faint hymn notes, each one exactly between heartbeats. We reformed what was left of the squad. 3 fire teams reduced to a ragged cluster. Malloran limped, then clutched his throat as if to keep his breath in. Every visor filmed over with grey from the inside. "Lights on," I ordered. The beams cut narrow corridors through a cavern vast enough to hold a hive spire. Columns rose into darkness, their surfaces uneven, shapes of shoulders and ribs frozen in mid-reach. Between them ash ran in rivulets, glowing faintly with green motes like drowned stars. Then the sound began, not heard exactly, but felt. A constant low hymn vibrating through armor plates and into bone. Words without consonants, syllables stretched like molten glass. Each pulse timed with the ash currents. Malloran whispered, "Lieutenant, they're singing." I raised a lamp higher. The nearest column was not stone. It was a man, or had been. A miner's body fused upright, skin turned to rock, mouth frozen open. The vocal cords trembled with every pulse producing the hymn. Beyond him, row after row of pillars, hundreds, stretching into the dark. A choir petrified, but still breathing ash. One trooper, Kerrick, broke. He raised his laser gun and fired. The bolt burned a hole straight through the nearest pillar. Instead of shattering, it bled dust. A soft grey stream that flowed across the floor to spell Kerrick in perfect letters before dissipating. Everyone stared. Kerrick dropped his weapon. His own nose began to bleed black grit again, heavier now. I keyed my slate. It displayed the ash currents, not as air movement but as exhalations from each pillar. Altogether, the flow rose upward toward a fissure in the cavern roof, the direction of the storm above. "It's exhaling," I muttered. "The storm is coming from here." My voice echoed back a half-second late, whispering the same words in a child's voice. Malloran's visor showed a faint overlay of coordinates deeper into the cavern. "Sir, Auspex is—" "No, wait." He slapped it. The display jittered like a heart on Auspex, then steadied into a new ping, large, moving, closing. "Size?" I asked. "Too big to be a man, too small for the engine." Reading. "Fluctuates like it's made of ash." I looked across the choir of miners. The hymn had shifted pitch. Higher, urgent, currents of ash converged from every aisle towards some point ahead, forming a slow whirlpool. My breath misted inside the helmet, though temperature read normal. "Form wedge," I said. "Weapons, hot. No more firing unless ordered." The pillars nearest us began to tremble, their open mouths widening as if to scream, but producing only louder hymn pulses. The ash at our feet rose to our knees like a tide. Kerrick tried to speak, but coughed a lungful of dust instead. Letters spilled from his mouth, grey and fragile, spelling his name again before crumbling. His eyes rolled white. Malloran grabbed him and dragged him back. "Lieutenant, we need to get out." "There's no out," I said. "Only forward." The hymn reached a new register, lower now like a machine starting up. My slate vibrated and displayed a single word: approaching. "Positions," I barked. Our lamp swung toward the ash whirlpool ahead. The currents formed ridges, then spines, then something like a ribcage rising slowly from the flow. I caught glimpses, multiple limbs, a head crowned with broken halos, faces flickering across its surface like memories. "Malloran?" I asked. "Auspex confirms mass." "It's moving right at us." The hymn cut off mid-note. In the sudden silence, the ash currents reversed direction, drawing toward us. Every pillar's vocal cords vibrated once like a single breath before a scream. The hymn stopped, and the cavern exhaled. Every pillar bent inward, mouths closing on the same silent word. Ash currents collapsed, then surged forward like a tide turned inside out. Our lamps caught fragments rising from the floor, splinters of stained glass, fragments of altars, broken aqueducts, all coalescing into a single moving mass. It stepped into view. At first only wings, vast pinions of debris and bone, feathers made of cracked reliquaries. Then a torso built of fused shrines and confessional booths, statues of saints serving as vertebrae. Faces of priests and miners pressed outward through its surface, mouths opening in reversed prayers. Its head was a cathedral spire split down the middle, inside glowing a pale heartlight that pulsed in time with ours. Malloran whispered, "Emperor protect." His words came back reversed through Vox. "Setorp E. Weapons up." I gave the order to fire. 37 laser guns and 2 plasma shots tore through the cavern air. Every bolt passed through the creature, as if through smoke, leaving only ripples of dust that spelled out our serial numbers before fading. It moved closer without moving, as if the cavern rearranged around it. The air grew thick with reverse litanies. My HUD scrolled unreadable characters. My data slate pulsed ANOMALYSIGMAASH repeatedly. Then it spoke. Reversed high Gothic poured from the spirehead, syllables folding back on themselves, but meaning blooming. "In my skull. Return the ashes to their owners. Memory must be absolved. You are not yours." Each word weighed more than the last, pressing my knees toward the ash. Trooper Venn fell, clawing at his helmet. Dust streamed from his eyes in twin black rivers. Malloran gritted his teeth, voice a whisper. "Lieutenant, it's inside our comms." I forced my breathing steady and triggered my helm recorder. "Lieutenant Varys Cade, 117th Cadian Shock Troop. Contact with unidentified proto-demon engine composed of fused shrines and debris. Weapons ineffective. Attempting data capture for inquisitorial relay." My voice cracked, but the recorder confirmed capture. Runes flickering gold. The creature's wings spread wider, filling the cavern. Every face upon it opened its mouth and inhaled. Ash currents rushed toward it from all directions, dragging our boots inches across the floor. It spoke again, confession weaponized. Engine unbound. The storm remembers. Return. I drew my sidearm, though it weighed nothing now. Fall back to. The Vox cut me off with a scream of Binharic and childsong combined. Malloran shouted, "Lieutenant, the pillars." The pillars were collapsing, miners' bodies breaking into dust streams feeding the creature. The cavern ceiling cracked, revealing thin slivers of sky, but wrong, 2 suns at once, both setting. The proto-demon inhaled deeper. Our lungs emptied though we still breathed. My recorder flickered. A new voice spoke over mine. My own voice, but older, reciting coordinates. Then it exhaled. Ash exploded outward in a wave. I felt my body lift, felt every memory I owned pulled through my pores like smoke. For a heartbeat I saw everything from above. The planet's crust veined with feathers, the storm spiraling upward, the Mechanicus expedition kneeling centuries ago, the storm engine's heart beating beneath. Then blackness. When vision returned, I was on my knees. We were on the surface again. Same landing zone, same shrine steps, but different. The ash dunes lay in new shapes, banners torn at other angles. 2 suns hung at the horizon, one sinking behind the other like a dying twin. Shadows stretched, snapped, and reformed. My chrono spun meaningless numbers. Malloran staggered beside me. "Sir, we're back." His voice cracked. "But how long?" Trooper Venn pointed skyward. The storm above pulsed like a lung, exhaling with our breaths. Servo skulls drifted frozen in midair like dead birds. The bastion doors stood open though we'd sealed them. Our footprints from hours ago were gone, replaced by others, smaller, barefoot, leading toward the dunes. I looked at my recorder. It still blinked gold, runes scrolling backward. Playback showed me standing here already, speaking words I hadn't yet said. The suns set twice in the space of a minute. The proto-demon's voice whispered across the ash, not through Vox, but through the air itself. Return. Remember. Return. I forced my fingers to steady on the slate. Lieutenant Varys Cade. Contact event concluded. Unknown temporal displacement. Squad relocated to surface. Threat persists. Malloran grabbed my arm. "Sir, look!" My auspex pinged again. Same coordinates. Same heartbeat pattern. But now it pulsed from beneath our boots, deeper than before, as if the engine had followed us up. The suns had set twice before we reached the bastion again. Each time they dipped below the ash horizon, the shadows stretched and snapped back like tethers. My boots crunched over dunes that had not been there an hour ago. Servo skulls hung frozen in the air like insects trapped in resin, their incense gone cold. The bastion doors stood open, candles guttering though no air moved. We had sealed them when we descended, but the seals lay unbroken, as if we had never touched them. My slate showed our biometrics flickering between present and archive inside the command sanctum. Everything was as before, weapons stacked, mugs steaming, yet different. The watch rotor parchment now bore a new column of signatures, written in neat administratum script. Names of our squad, times of death marked M41.127, all dated 300 years ago. Malloran touched the ink. It smeared under his glove, still wet. "Sir, we're written here." I keyed the Vox to high band. A signal pulsed back immediately, clear and cold, stamped with astropathic authentication codes. Orders scrolled across my visor. Hold Bastion. Reinforcements en route. Execute Protocol Null 7. Signed by Colonel Oren and General Threx. Both long dead. Trooper Venn whispered, "They know we're here." His voice cracked into static. Another transmission followed, a reinforcement roster listing entire regiments that no longer existed. ETA, 3 minutes. We waited. No troops arrived, only the reversed hymn humming under the walls. I began to pace, logging every detail. Lieutenant Varys Cade, receiving impossible astropathic orders signed by deceased commanders. Reinforcement signals without arrival. Possible time displacement event, following proto-demon contact. My own words lagged a half-second behind in my helmet, like an echo from someone else's mouth. Malloran stared at the floor. Lieutenant, our shadows. I looked. They no longer clung to our boots, but lagged several seconds behind, moving after us like delayed ghosts. When I raised my hand, my shadow raised its hand moments later. When Ven knelt, his shadow still stood. One guardsman, Kerrick, back toward the wall. His shadow detached entirely, stood up straight, and walked away across the room like a man heading for a door. It faded into the ash, falling from the ceiling. Kerrick screamed and collapsed, his visor fogging grey from the inside. I grabbed his harness, but my gauntlet passed through him for a heartbeat before re-solidifying. His biometrics flickered present/absent in rapid sequence. "Containment," I barked. "Hold formation." Malloran gripped his rifle. "Lieutenant, are we still here?" I didn't answer. My own shadow had begun to move before me now, anticipating my steps, saluting doors I hadn't opened. The reversed hymn swelled, no longer child-voiced but layered like a parade ground of whispering officers. I keyed the vox again, desperation bleeding through. "Command, this is Cade. Confirm reinforcements. Confirm reality of orders." A voice answered. My voice, but older, issuing coordinates and a prayer I didn't know yet. Then silence. The parchment on the table changed as we watched. New orders wrote themselves. Absolve yourselves. Return the ashes to their owners. Signed by Inquisitor-designate Cade. Malloran's visor filmed over. "Sir, that's your name." I reached for the parchment, but my hand passed through the ink like smoke. My shadow, lagging seconds behind, caught up and placed its own hand on the table. The ink pulsed under it. Kerrick whimpered. "Lieutenant, your shadow." I turned. It stood fully apart now, a perfect black silhouette in the shape of me, helmeted, las pistol drawn. It raised its hand in crisp salute. The old Casa Mirac salute Colonel Orin had drilled into us. Then it stepped backward into the drifting ash and dissolved. My slate vibrated once, displaying a single word, follow. The sun set a third time, while we still stood on the same patch of ash. Each sunset was shorter than the last, the light folding inward like paper burning. Above, the storm had changed again. No longer amorphous, it now held shape. Trenches gouged in clouds, banners whipping in invisible wind, whole lost regiments marching in endless columns inside the vapor. Some bore our own colors. Some were legions long dead. Their faces were grey masks, but I knew the eyes. Men I had fought beside on Casa Mirac, on Epsilon Reach. They raised their laser guns in salute, then dissolved back into the swirl. I gathered the survivors, a dozen left, ash crusting our visors from the inside. Malloran's pupils were pale circles. Ven's lips moved with silent prayers. Shadows still lagged behind us like exhausted ghosts. "Perimeter," I ordered. "Stay anchored." My voice cracked. The vox sent it back immediately, distorted with a Mechanicus accent, Binharic undertones threaded through each word like barbed wire. Hearing myself as a tech priest speaking felt like being peeled from the inside. I tried again. "This is Lieutenant Varys Cade, 117th Cadian. If anyone receives this..." Static swallowed the rest, then repeated my words backward with a child's giggle. Malloran turned his faceplate toward me. "Lieutenant, we can't hold like this. That relic, the sensor, it's anchoring all of this. Has to be the sensor. Lay on the altar steps where the storm had spat us back. Still cinder black. Still pulsing faintly like a heart. Around it ash flowed in tiny spirals, defying the wind. Each spiral spelling fragments of Binharic. Remember, /absolve, /fuel. Ven's voice shook. We destroy it or we become part of it. He coughed black grit into his glove. The letters KADE appeared in the dust before crumbling. I stared at the sensor. Memories bled across my visor. The pillars, the proto-demon, the Skitarii eye nailed upright. Every line led back here. The storm was a lung, and the sensor its mouth. Form circle, I said. Bayonets, grenades, melters. We're ending this. My words came back a heartbeat late, spoken in Binharic by some unseen choir. We tightened around the relic. Ash rose to our knees, tugging like water. The storm above folded lower, trenches and banners descending until we could almost hear marching boots in the clouds. Names whispered through the vox. Our names, our sins, our deaths, dated centuries ago. Malaran primed a melter charge. By the throne. On your word, Lieutenant. I keyed my recorder, forcing calm. Lieutenant Varys Cade, 117th Cadian Shock Troop, attempting destruction of sensor relic suspected anchor of anomaly. Storm-forming regimental phantoms. Vox compromised. Reinforcements absent. My voice cracked into static at absent, and returned as present in Mechanicus cant. We knelt as one. The sensor pulsed faster, seams widening like gills. Inside swirled not motes, but molten icons, tiny aquilas and cog skulls spinning in grey fire. Each exhalation matched our heartbeats. Malaran looked up. Sir, storm's moving. The regimental shapes in the clouds turned their heads toward us. Banners tilted. Trenches realigned until they pointed straight at our position. The air smelled of hot metal and feather ash. No more delays, I said. Execute. Charges detonated. Light slammed upward, ash blown outward in a ring. The sensor cracked along its spine, spilling molten icons that hissed as they hit the ash, carving strange glyphs. Our visors went dark, then cleared. The storm paused, banners frozen mid-snap. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the relic bled. From the crack poured not incense, but a stream of glowing symbols, molten aquilars deforming into something else. 8-pointed, spiked, twisting into a sigil older than the Imperium. The ash beneath our boots ignited in faint red lines, connecting each trooper like a circuit. Malaran stumbled back. Dark Mechanicum. His voice came out reversed, terrified. The ground vibrated. My slate pulsed a new warning. Sensor breach. Engine unbound. The molten icons coiled into a spiral at our feet, forming a perfect 8-spoked wheel. Ash currents converged, tugging at our boots like grasping fingers. I raised my last pistol, but it felt like smoke. Hold formation. Do not step outside the circle. My words came back as 1,000 tech voices chanting the same order. The sigil under us glowed brighter, etching itself deeper into the ash like burning glass. Above, the storm's regiments halted mid-march, heads snapping downward as one. Banners curled into claws. A low hum built under the planet. Through our boots, into our bones. Malaran's shadow lagged, then bolted from his feet, running in circles around the sigil, like a dog chasing its tail. Then screamed as his own shadow crawled up his legs like oil. My visor displayed our heartbeats as numbers counting backward. I keyed my recorder one last time. Lieutenant Varys Cade, destruction attempt failed. Relic bleeding, sigil formation, possible dark mechanicum involvement. The recorder hissed, then spoke my next line before I did. We are already fuel. The sensor cracked completely open. A rush of grey fire erupted, molten icons spraying outward and burning words into the ash around us. The sigil at our feet completed itself with a final line of light. It read, "Welcome back, end of entry. Cliffhanger, logged." The ash beneath our boots fractured with a sound like bone grinding against iron. Fissures ripped open, revealing a vast cavernous space beneath the surface, a forge of impossible scale. Shadows danced on the jagged walls, cast by the molten sigil beneath us. The air stank of burned incense and molten metal. Through the cracks, a faint vibration thrummed into our boots and chest, the heartbeat of a machine, but a machine that breathed like a living thing. The forge stretched endlessly. Gears spun in silent procession, but not made of steel or adamantium. They were crafted of rosaries, strings of beads glinting black, threaded through with filaments of sinew. Turbines of bone, sharpened ribs and skull fragments, turned without friction, slicing the air with spectral efficiency. Chains forged from skeletal hands reached into shadow, gripping molten ash and funneling it into the engine's maw. Every moving part whispered litanies in reversed high Gothic. I realized immediately. This was the storm engine the Mechanicus expedition had sought. The same construct hinted at in the corrupted Skitarii logs. A device designed to harvest the sins, fears, and prayers of Harrowspire 9 and convert them into weaponized ash for some unknown purpose. And it had awakened. The squad froze, their faces illuminated by the eerie red glow of molten icons. One trooper, Reen, swore under his breath as a skeletal turbine swung overhead, sending shards of ash down like whips. "We need to end this," I said, my voice hard over the static-laden vox. "Charges, melters. I'm going down. You hold the line." Ven's eyes widened. "Lieutenant, it's alive. It knows us. It sees." "We hold, now," I barked. "No hesitation. Not here. Not ever." The team formed a defensive perimeter at the fissure edge. The ash around them swirled like water, solidifying into spectral figures. Cadian regiments we had once seen in dreams, now risen from the storm's memory, weapons raised. They advanced silently, frozen in looped motions, then broke into erratic bursts, charging the squad. Shadows detached from our bodies and joined the fray, leaving ghostly outlines on the ground as they attacked their own flesh. I activated the grav ladder and began my descent into the machine's heart. The noise of the spectral figures faded above, replaced by a low, resonant chant emanating from the turbines. Each turbine's rotation harmonized with the engine's pulse, amplifying the whispers of the dead, of the lost, of the faithful. I could feel the ash pulling at me, tugging with currents of guilt, threading my mind with visions of every battle, every death, every prayer I had ignored. The first thing I saw in the engine's maw was the input chamber, a cylinder of jagged bone, every inch covered with names carved into ribs, femurs, and skulls. I recognized some. Old sergeants, men who had trained under me. Others were anonymous, nameless victims of the Mechanicus's zeal. The chamber exhaled ash upward in waves, feeding the storm above. I understood then. The engine didn't just produce the storm was its exhalation. A control panel rose from the ground like a spinal column. Levers of bone and gold ran into a network of cogseals, and holographic projections flickered above. Visions of Harrowspire 9 over centuries. Each image showed endless labor, endless suffering, endless devotion twisted into fuel for the storm engine. My pulse raced. Every calculation of weight, gravity, and energy that the Mechanicus might have used seemed irrelevant now. This was alive. I moved toward the heart, planting melter charges at key junctions, each step measured. The ash tried to climb my boots, to crawl inside my visor, to whisper confessions I had never spoken aloud. I felt my mother's voice first, soft, coaxing, and impossibly familiar. The engine was speaking directly to me. "Varus," it murmured, the sound curling around my eardrums, 1,000 reversed prayers layered atop each other. Return what is ours. Take it, bear it, become its keeper. I froze. A projection flared in the molten air. Me, older, robes of a tech priest fused to my body, standing over the storm engine, hands on the cinder-black sensor. Around me, cadavers marched in ash, soldiers, Skitarii, saints, all feeding the engine endlessly. And I was there, calm, custodial, a master of sins transformed into power. I staggered back, almost tripping over a bone turbine, the weight of that possible future pressing on my spine. The engine hummed in response, as if acknowledging my hesitation. A skeletal hand reached from a spinning turbine, nearly brushing my shoulder, but then withdrew. The machine waited. Patience that outlived men. Above, the squad fought spectral soldiers, shadows and ash currents. Explosions from grenades illuminated the cavern intermittently. Yet the engine was untouched by all of it, unmoved, eternal. Every strike seemed to fuel it instead, as if the violence itself was another input. I pressed on, igniting the melter charges along the turbine shafts and rosary gears. Each charge's countdown was broadcast in a chorus of ghostly prayers, the whispers now almost chants. I whispered to myself, for the Imperium, for the living, for the ash that remembers. The engine responded. Its turbines slowed, not from fear but curiosity, the ash currents pausing to observe. The molten symbols on the ground shifted toward me, arranging themselves into letters. Behold your future. I clenched my teeth, eyes burning with the reflection of fire and metal. If I hesitated, if I faltered, the machine would bend me to its will. Every prayer, every regret, every memory of love or loss would be repurposed into fuel for the storm. With finality, I slotted the last melter charge. My gloved hand hovered over the ignition trigger, the engine whispering my mother's prayers again, folding time, showing me that vision of custodianship. And yet, somewhere deep inside, the soldier in me screamed, "This cannot happen. I cannot be its keeper." I activated the charge sequence. A low pulse reverberated through the cavern. Sparks flew along bone gears. Ash trembled in currents above. The machine gave a single deep exhalation that rattled teeth and bone. And then, silence. The charges counted down. The engine's response was not anger, not pain, merely observation. And as the first charge went off, a wave of ash swept upward, carrying the scent of burned incense, molten bone, and my mother's voice receding into the storm. Cliffhanger logged. The storm engine awakens fully. Cade alone faces the decision, destruction or surrender. It whispers the prayers of the dead and shows him a future where he becomes its custodian. The heart chamber pulsed with a rhythm that was neither machine nor living organism, but a collision of both. Ash drifted like a storm, frozen in time, suspended between the ceiling and floor. The rosary gears and skeletal turbines seemed to hum, vibrating through the soles of my boots. Every step I took was echoed by an impossible number of footfalls, some my own, some belonging to lives that never should have intersected with mine. Time fractured here. Mechanicus priests I had read about in the expedition logs appeared before me, moving in loops of devotion and terror, their faces obscured by bronze respirators, hands clutching arcane implements. Miners, kneeling in ash-stained robes, faces carved into silent screams, were welded to the floorboards that no longer existed. And beyond them, my squad's phantoms staggered, their last moments of fear and confusion replaying endlessly. Each death overlapped another, each shadow of pain layering atop the next.
I stumbled, almost falling into the molten maw of the engine. The sensor relic, now melted into a darkened crucible, radiated heat and whispered my own sins back to me. The air was thick with the voices of the dead. My dead, my future, my regrets. I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing against
my chest like a physical force. By the Emperor, I muttered, voxing into the empty chamber, though my voice sounded alien, slowed, reversed. The engine absorbed it. I spoke again, louder, forcing myself to confess. I disobeyed direct orders. I led them here. I led them into this nightmare. I failed my command. I failed my men. The words trembled on my tongue, and the ash coiled around me, reacting, listening. I felt its tendrils brush my visor, trace my hairline curl around my gloves. The storm engine pulsed in response, a slow, deliberate heartbeat that seemed to echo my confession back into every corner of the chamber. A vision unfolded in the ash. I saw the Mechanicus priests inserting their own consciousness into the engine, offering prayers and lives as fuel for the storm. I saw miners being drawn from the surface, their screams eternal, fused into the construct itself. And then I saw my squad, my men contorting in impossible angles as the ash enveloped them, freezing them mid-motion into statues of terror and agony. Rain's face was frozen in a silent scream. Ven's head tilted back unnaturally, eyes wide. My own reflection appeared on the ash, unrecognizable, older and knowing. The engine pulsed again, slower this time, and a voice, soft and coaxing, filled the chamber. Lieutenant Cade, confession is the first step. Surrender your burden. Merge, become absolved. Become necessary. I felt a pull toward the core, a gravitational tug more than physical. The sensor's molten shadow elongated toward me, tendrils of ash reaching like skeletal fingers. The voice coaxed, promising relief, a release from the guilt, the fear, the weight of every life I had failed to save. My hand itched to touch the pulsating core, to let the engine claim me, to merge and erase every regret. Yet the soldier in me resisted. Every instinct screamed, do not succumb. Not yet. Not here. Not to this abomination. And as I hesitated, the ash outside the chamber convulsed, forming shapes of my comrades, statues of horror, twisted mid-scream, lifted by the storm, their faces a frozen mirror of despair. They were alive, yet dead, preserved in terror. The engine did not flinch. It catalogued them, numbered them, whispered their sins in my voice, in every tongue it could muster. I fell to my knees, gripping my head, voxing again. Forgive me for trying to save them. The words tore through the chamber, echoing across centuries of memory embedded in the engine. The ghosts of the Mechanicus priests paused mid-incantation. The miners' expressions warped into something less grotesque, as if my words had touched them across time. And then the engine responded. You may be absolved, Cade. Surrender. Let go. Let it contain you. The sensor in the chamber's heart pulsed violently, sending waves of ash outward. Every heartbeat resonated with mine, every vibration synchronized with my blood. I imagined merging with the engine, becoming part of its mind, part of the storm, part of the relentless recycling of guilt and devotion. The promise was seductive. Power, knowledge, and absolution at the same time. But then I saw the reflection again. Older me, voice steady, issuing codes, commanding the purge of the very storm I stood in. Not surrendering, not merging, controlling, purging. I realized that this was not a vision, but a message from the engine's future projection, a warning embedded in the temporal folds of its design. I staggered backward. My hand trembled over the melter charges still strapped to my belt. Outside, the statues of my squad began to twitch, their ash shifting as if alive, whispering their last words in distorted litanies. Shadows detached themselves from the statues and swirled in the air, circling me, circling the engine. Every motion was synchronized, choreographed in a terrible precision only the storm could manage. I realized then the true horror. The engine did not merely punish, it prepared. Every soul, every failure, every confession was catalogued, refined, and transformed into something more potent. Every step I had taken, every disobedience, every attempt to save a life had been anticipated, and the engine waited for me to make the final choice, to merge and be absolved, or to fight and risk annihilation. I raised my vox, recording everything. The echoes of my confession reverberated in the chamber, but something was wrong. The vox emitted a feedback pulse. Then, a new voice emerged, identical to mine but older, hardened with authority beyond my years. Unit Cade. Initiate Purge Protocol. Target Harrowspire 9. Repeat, all anomalies must be neutralized. The words were not projected by me. They were me, or rather a version of me, shaped by the engine, tempered in time, imbued with knowledge of what must come. My pulse raced. I stared into the molten sensor, into the engine's heart, into the ash swirling around the statues of my men, and I realized the final act was imminent. Cliffhanger logged. Cade's vox now carries a voice identical to his own, older and commanding, issuing purge codes. The engine waits. His confession has set in motion a choice between obedience, merger, or rebellion, with consequences rippling through time, ash, and memory. The ash dunes convulsed with a life that defied comprehension. Spectral shapes emerged from the grey storm, marching with an unnatural rhythm, their boots sinking but never disturbing the soil beneath. These were no ordinary shades. These were the soldiers, miners, and priests who had vanished over centuries on Harrowspire 9, pulled into the storm engine's orbit of corruption and devotion. Their banners, torn and charred, fluttered despite the absence of wind. Helmets bore names I had memorized from casualty reports, names that should have been confined to history. Yet here they were, embodied in ash and sinew, moving as one. I staggered backward, gripping the detonator for the melter charges I had planted in the forge engine. My hands shook, my mind a maelstrom of fear, guilt, and instinct. I pressed the trigger. Nothing. Sparks hissed across the wiring, and the charges failed to ignite. A tremor ran through the chamber, and I realized with a sinking certainty the storm engine drew energy not from the material world, but from the very essence of our attempts to destroy it. Every action, every resistance, every detonated charge fed its power, reinforced the cyclone forming above us, and accelerated the warp ash spiraling into the clouds. Above, the rift began to open. A void impossible and blacker than the deepest shadows I had seen in the void ships of the segmentum. Ash spiraled upward like water, dragging the spectral legions along in its gravity-defying currents. The storm's howl echoed inside my helmet, distorted through the ash and the relic's lingering resonance. I knew then the cyclone was no longer atmospheric. It was temporal, spatial, cosmic. It was collapsing reality into itself, and I was standing at its fulcrum. I could feel the engines pull through my very body. The sensor relic, melted yet alive in its heart, sent tremors through my bones. Every beat of its pulse resonated with my heartbeat, It demanded union, a conduit between its power and my presence. Only by severing this link could the cyclone collapse, but the attempt was horrifyingly personal. I realized that this link was more than psychic, more than spiritual. It was corporeal. Every fiber of my being, every neuron, every drop of blood had been co-opted by the engine's wrath. The spectral regiments approached the bastion in synchronized cadence, ghostly muskets raised, banners fluttering, their eyes glowing faintly through the ash. Even as I pressed my melter charges against the storm engine's outer cogs, I could feel the pull intensifying. The cyclonic rift above began to reflect the horrors below. Statues of my squad twisted mid-scream, flickering between life and ash, their mouths opening to scream voiceless warnings across centuries. I forced myself to move, every step heavy, as though the ash itself sought to drag me into submission. I reached the central conduit, linking me to the relic. The sensor's pulse intensified, echoing through my skull, whispering memories of my mother's prayers, of confessions I had never spoken aloud, of sins I had not yet committed. The engine wanted more than obedience. It wanted identity, fuel, soul, and flesh. I gritted my teeth. I had no choice. I pulled the conduit. Pain seared through my body. Every nerve was on fire. The connection resisted violently, latching onto my will, my bones, my very essence. My vision fractured. Images of the damned soldiers, my squad, the Mechanicus priests, the miners, all merged into a single swirling panorama of torment. Each face I had failed to save now stared at me in unison, their eyes wide, accusing, pleading, condemning. Then it began. My body started to crumble. Ash flaked from my fingers, dust from my knuckles. My boots cracked, toes dissolving into grey powder, yet I remained conscious. The sensation was alien and excruciating. I could feel myself in pieces, disassembling while every fragment retained thought, sensation, and memory. Every breath drew more ash into my lungs. Every heartbeat propagated through fragmented sinews. I was both present and absent, dissolving, yet aware, and still I had to act. I reached deeper into the conduit, tearing at the lingering remnants of the sensor's influence. The storm above responded violently. Winds reversed, twisting upward into a funnel that threatened to collapse the bastion. Spectral regiments faltered, some dissipating into the rift, others recoiling as if aware of the severing attempt. Each shattering fragment of my body resonated with a shockwave that rippled through the chamber, pushing against the storm's pull. I glimpsed my reflection in a pool of molten ash. My face, or what remained of it, stared back, grey, granular, skeletal, yet unmistakably mine. My eyes burned with the resolve that had brought me this far. If I failed now, not only the squad, but the entire bastion, the planet, and perhaps surrounding systems would become a monument to the engine's wrath. I gritted my teeth against the pain and reinforced my mental grip, commanding the conduit to release. The engine shrieked, not with sound, but with an omnipresent vibration that cracked stone, unmade air, and warped reality. The cyclone above shuddered, rifts collapsing inward. Ash currents reversed, dragging spectral soldiers downward into oblivion. I could feel my body disintegrating further, each moment a test of endurance against annihilation. The sensor's pulse weakened, then flickered, and the connection snapped. Silence fell. The spectral regiments dissipated, scattered into nothingness, leaving only the remnants of ash dunes. The cyclone vanished, the rift above sealed. The storm engine's core sputtered, smoke curling from molten cogs, silent now, at least temporarily. I floated in the chamber, body almost entirely reduced to ash, consciousness tethered to the last vestiges of nerve and memory. My fingers were gone. My boots were gone. My uniform existed in fragmented tatters, drifting in grey clouds around me. I realized, with a hollow certainty, that victory had come at a cost far beyond comprehension. I was alive, yet not alive, whole, yet in pieces. And in that fragmented existence, I understood the engine's cruel genius. It had prepared for resistance, accounted for confession, and now awaited a future attempt, a future me, perhaps a version wiser and more desperate than I could currently conceive. Cliffhanger logged. Lieutenant Varys Cade's body begins to crumble into ash while he remains conscious. The storm engine is weakened, but the link between flesh, mind, and relic has left him in a state of partial existence, hovering between life and memory, tethered only by willpower and the remnants of his fragmented soul. The damned have returned to the ashes, but the final act of reckoning is yet to come. The ash drifted thick and choking, like smoke from a funeral pyre that spanned centuries. My body, or what remained of it, was nothing more than granular fragments held together by sheer will. Yet my mind burned with clarity. Every pulse of the storm above was a whisper. Every flicker of cinder in the ruined halls a voice speaking my name. The storm engine's collapse was incomplete. Fragments of its will still rippled through the catacombs, tugging at my consciousness. There was no turning back. I had to sever the link. I dragged myself toward the inverted chapel, the walls lined with fossilized feathers, suspended altars, and glowing glass that pulsed like a heartbeat. The weight of gravity, or anti-gravity, pressed unevenly against my fractured body. Each step required effort, measured in centuries, as if the ash itself resisted my movement, unwilling to allow a creature so intimately linked to the engine to escape. My vision shifted as I moved. Fragments of the spectral regiments, the miners, the Mechanicus priests, and my squad flickered across the walls like fractured mosaics. I could see their despair, their confusion, their endless entrapment. The inverted altar loomed before me, suspended from the ceiling by chains of rust and bone. I recognized it from the first descent, yet now it felt alive, resonating with every fragment of ash that made up my body. Above, the storm churned, folding in on itself, screaming in silent sound through the corridor, reverberating across the sector. It was no longer external. It was me, or I was it. The connection had merged the boundaries of flesh and anomaly, and now the only salvation lay in reversal, in renunciation of the identity that had been co-opted. I recalled the whispered litanies from the sensor motes that had invaded our lungs. Each phrase had been inverted, the words of confession rebounding into the abyss. I closed my fragmented eyes and began to recite the reverse litany aloud, not as a soldier, not as Lieutenant Cade, but as a vessel. Each syllable tore at the vestiges of self, severing memories, titles, and duties from the threads the engine had entwined with my being. The act was excruciating. My sense of self began to fray, spilling into the ash. Every heartbeat was a pulse of the storm, every breath a cascade of centuries of accumulated sin. The walls trembled, and the altars above swung with newfound weight, responding to my inverted litany. The sensor motes, grey and swirling, were drawn toward me, following the rhythm of my fragmented existence. The storm above, once a cyclone of chaotic ash, began to contract, spiraling inward, funneling into the conduit I had created with my recitation. The demon engine screamed, a soundless roar that resonated in the bones of the world itself, as its colossal form twisted, fractured, and began to collapse. Wings of debris and bone fell into cinders, Banners dissolved into dust, and the pillars of fused miners cracked and crumbled. With each phrase, I felt my identity being unmade. Lieutenant Verus Cade, 117th Cadian Shock Troop, son, brother, soldier, all dissolved into ash, leaving only a tethered consciousness, a spark of awareness capable of witnessing, without owning. Pain and relief, horror and clarity, merged in a single instantaneous perception. I could feel the engine's essence being absorbed into me, even as I drained it, a simultaneous act of destruction and containment. Every remaining fragment of spectral regiment was consumed, returning to the ash that had birthed them. And yet, as the demon engine collapsed, the sector itself shifted. I was no longer merely on Harrowspire 9. I was within it. Every grain of ash carried memory. Every cinder contained a shard of consciousness. The inverted chapel, the catacombs, the dunes above, even the void rift, all resonated within me. I could see through countless eyes, the miners who had vanished, the priests who had perished, the soldiers who had been consumed by the storm. The ash was not inert. It remembered, it judged, it witnessed, and I was tethered to it. I tried to pull away, to retreat into whatever remained of my body, but the connection was absolute. My consciousness stretched across the sector, aware of every movement, every flicker of ash, every shadow dancing on ruined walls. The realization came with crushing clarity. I could never leave. Harrowspire 9 had become both prison and vessel. The storm engine was destroyed, but in absorbing its essence, I had become part of the planet's memory, part of its perpetual witness. Escape was impossible. The ash had claimed me as its custodian, a consciousness without form, a sentinel over a world suspended in perpetual twilight. Time became meaningless. Seconds, minutes, centuries, they all passed simultaneously. I could observe the skeletal remains of regiments long dead, spectral banners frozen mid-step, and the faint echoes of prayers whispered in forgotten tongues. My body, what little remained, was nothing more than a husk drifting among the cinders. Yet my mind, scattered as it was, spanned the sector, tethered to the living memory of ash itself. I saw the future and the past folded into one continuous moment. Every footstep, every battle, every act of faith and betrayal replayed endlessly. The inverted chapel trembled once more as the last pulse of the storm engine dissipated. Silence fell, thick, heavy, and absolute. Yet in that silence, I could hear everything. The distant whistle of wind through ruined spires, the soft settling of ash across dunes, the faint hum of memories that had never been recorded. I had achieved the act of self-excommunication. The storm was no longer independent, no longer a threat. It was mine. Or rather, I was its. The demon engine had fallen, and yet the echo of its purpose lingered, mirrored in my fractured consciousness. Cliffhanger logged. Lieutenant Cade perceives the sector through countless eyes, the ash everywhere alive with memory and witness, and realizes that he can never leave Harrowspire 9. His existence is now bound to the planet itself, a consciousness without corporeal form, a guardian and prisoner simultaneously. The mission log ends in fragmented script, scattered across the last cinders of the storm engine, recording awareness rather than identity, thought rather than body. The storm had claimed me completely. What remained of flesh and bone was little more than dust and echoes, a fragile shell crawling through the cindered ruins. My mind, tethered to every speck of ash on Harrowspire 9, stretched outward, sensing every tremor, every wisp of wind, every distant pulse of the storm engine's remnants.
The inverted chapel, the skeletal spires, the fossilized feathers, all of it became an extension of me, and yet a prison. My body moved slowly, dragged by gravity that seemed both absent and oppressive, toward the lone Vox spire standing stubborn against the ash-choked horizon. The Vox spire, ancient and war-worn, hummed faintly as though it recognized my presence. Its receiver crystals glowed dimly through the drifting ash, reflecting back fragments of the storm that writhed around me, like serpents made of smoke. I extended what remained of my hands, feeling through the lingering ash particles, manipulating the interface as best I could. Commands that had once required mechanical precision were now gestures of thought and will, each input pulsing through me, rather than through fingers. I was a conduit, a half-living, half-ethereal operator, and the spire's system shivered under the weight of my presence. Behind me, the last surviving trooper of the 117th watched in horrified silence. Sergeant Dalen's face was streaked with ash and sweat, eyes wide as he tried to comprehend the transformation. I no longer resembled a human being, yet I spoke. My voice carried across the storm, as if filtered through centuries of wind and cinder. The words I transmitted were a warning, stark and absolute. Do not retrieve us. Not me, not the squad, not the storm engine fragments. The entire planet, the anomaly, the ash itself. To bring the Inquisition here would be catastrophic. A lesson learned at the cost of unspeakable suffering. The Vox Spire accepted the transmission, pulsing with acknowledgement. Augurs in orbit, long before the Inquisition's response began to detect anomalies. Harrow Spire 9 was no longer a simple mining world. Its mass seemed to expand subtly, as though absorbing nearby asteroids, debris, even stray clouds of cosmic dust. The planet itself responded to my presence, as if aware that I was now fused with it. Gravity wells fluctuated in imperceptible patterns, and orbital scans returned readings that made navigators question reality. It was a living system now, half planet, half storm, and fully mine to contain. Sergeant Dalen watched me crawl toward the Vox Spire. His hands shook on his laser gun, still functional but useless against the phenomena surrounding us. I tried to reassure him, though my words had become more sensation than speech, felt as vibrations through the ash and air. Survive, I said, the syllables carried both by my voice and the storm itself. Report what you see. Do not return. His nod was hesitant, his entire being balancing between obedience and terror. I could see him thinking of command, of protocol, of faith. All of it was irrelevant now. Protocol could not bind the ash, nor could faith withstand the weight of centuries of condensed horror. I placed my remaining corporeal limbs against the Vox Spire's access panel. Sparks flared as the ash-conductive particles interfaced with the machine's archaic circuitry. The Vox Spire pulsed in response, and I could feel its entire transmission network trembling under my half-corporeal touch. Messages prepared for relay streamed through me, compiled not by hands but by thought, intent, and memory. I sent coordinates, encoded warnings, and data logs. The entirety of the mission, from the first drop through the descent into the catacombs, the sensor incident, the storm engine's awakening, and my own self-excommunication. Every anomaly, every ghost, every spectral regiment was recorded and broadcast as caution. The ash around me became a tangible curtain, drifting into my vision, settling in waves upon the spire and the dunes. I realized I was dissolving further. The remaining corporeal fragments of my body, legs, arms, torso, were fading into dust and ash, carried on the currents I now partially controlled. Sergeant Dalen blinked as I spoke again. My voice fragmented across the storm, multiple tones layered atop each other. He could still hear me, and yet I was no longer fully present. You will remember. You will record. You will not return. Do not. My words faded into the ash itself, the storm taking them and reshaping them into soundless warnings that clung to the dunes and spires like embers. In orbit, the Inquisition's augurs detected the transmission. At first, they presumed it was a glitch, a centuries-old file corrupted and replaying anomalous data. And then the acknowledgement came, a signal from an Inquisitor whose identity had been purged from all records, erased from the annals of the Imperium centuries ago. The transmission confirmed receipt. My warning, impossible as it was, had reached someone whose knowledge was erased by protocol, someone existing outside the bureaucracy, outside recorded history. I could feel their awareness brushing against the storm, and it was unsettling. It was as if someone equally bound to secrecy now knew of the horror that had claimed Harrowspire 9. My remaining body fragments collapsed entirely into
ash. I was nothing but a consciousness distributed across the storm, the Vox spire, the catacombs, and the dunes. Yet I still spoke, still transmitted. Every cinder carried my warning, my awareness, my essence. The ash was no longer inert. It pulsed with memory, with record, with the message to never retrieve, to never intervene. I was now both lieutenant and archive, witness and warning, tethered to the planet and to the anomaly I had become custodian of. Sergeant Dalen fell to his knees, clutching the Vox crystal. He watched as I dissolved entirely, the storm around him thickening, solidifying, and writhing with spectral forms. Yet my voice persisted, layered within the storm currents, carrying through every swirl of ash, every puff of wind, every settling cinder. Do not retrieve us. Do not come. It was both command and confession, warning and decree. My identity, Lieutenant Varys Cade, was gone, yet I existed more fully than ever as the consciousness of Harrowspire 9. The storm shifted, spiraling upward in tight currents, wrapping the Vox spire and the surface structures in a protective cocoon. Debris from orbit, meteoric shards, abandoned satellites, dust from distant moons, began to descend toward the planet, drawn in by the subtle gravitic anomaly we had inadvertently created. Sergeant Dalen's hair whipped in the currents, his body trembling with the physical awareness of the unnatural gravity fluctuations. He could not leave. Not yet. My consciousness brushed against him, guiding without touching, instructing without words, compelling survival. Finally, as the ash swirled thicker and the storm currents coalesced around the Vox spire, I understood the full extent of containment. The storm, the anomaly, the remnants of the engine, all were bound within the parameters I had set with my half-corporeal self. The transmission had gone out. The coordinates were encoded. The warning was clear. No one in the Imperium could retrieve this world without risking unimaginable loss. I was both prison warden and prisoner, and my awareness extended outward indefinitely, through the ash, the storms, and the skeletal remains of the bastion and catacombs. Cliffhanger logged, the Vox spire crackles with acknowledgement from an Inquisitor whose identity file was purged centuries ago. Harrowspire 9 absorbs more mass from surrounding space. Gravity fluctuates unpredictably, and the storm around Cade's consciousness thickens, ensuring that any attempt at retrieval will confront both the storm and the half-corporeal custodian embedded within it. The mission log ends in a cascade of ash particles carrying both awareness and warning across the planet, unreadable to those unprepared. The void around Harrowspire 9 was no longer empty. Ash, once confined to the planet's tortured surface, now drifted in silent currents into neighboring lanes, twisting in invisible gravitational eddies. Space was littered with black motes that caught on. Sensor arrays and hull plating, clinging to starship exteriors as if marking them for observation. No shipboard cleaning protocols could remove the dust. It seemed to read, to recognize, to remember. The Imperium, confronted with the incomprehensible readings, could neither order exterminatus nor safely leave the world alone. Harrowspire 9 was classified as quarantined, an ambiguous denial of destruction, a silent threat sealed by bureaucratic hesitation and fear. Across orbiting void lanes, patrol ships monitored the anomaly at impossible distances. Black grit gathered on the hulls like frost, forming patterns that made navigators shiver. Slowly the shapes became legible. Letters, names, a litany of the lost. 117th Cadian Shock Troop. Each trooper's name etched into the ship's metal, as if the storm itself were commemorating its victims, its custodians, its survivors. For those aboard the vessels, reading the names was a silent confession, a reminder of the impossible horror that had unfolded below. The ash carried history in ways no archive or cogitator could ever match. Memories recorded in sediment, in drifting motes, in the shapes of letters that should not exist in void. In the storm, I persisted. The remnants of Lieutenant Veriscade were no longer in flesh, no longer in bone. I was wind and ash, pulse and echo, entwined with the planet's expanding mass. My consciousness moved in currents, through fissures, across plains of cinder, and into orbit. The Vox spire I had activated continued transmitting, feeding my awareness into the void in intermittent pulses. Across the void, my voice was heard, not in words but in resonance. Liturgies and litanies, reversed and twisted, spiraled through the currents, penetrating communications arrays, subtle enough to remain unnoticed as divine, anomalous interference. Yet those sensitive to warp currents, to echoes of the beyond, felt the presence and shivered. The Imperium labeled it a containment anomaly, assigning nothing but observation fleets and orbital augurs. They did not know, could not comprehend, that Harrowspire 9 had become a living ledger, a vault of memory, a prison and instrument both. The storm now had agency. It remembered not just the fallen, but the orders whispered, the confessions shouted, the commands broken and obeyed. Even the names of Cade's squad were carried beyond the planet's immediate atmosphere, spiraling toward distant outposts and supply lanes. Ships entering these lanes collected ash on their hulls, and in the drifting black dust, letters formed, each a warning, a litany, a record. Inside the storm, echoes of voices overlapped. Cade's own voice, or what remained of it, recited the reversed litanies he had learned from the catacombs. The words were an instruction and a remembrance, looping endlessly, carried into every eddy and whirl of ash. The cadence was hypnotic, yet unnerving, a harmony of sorrow, duty, and dread. I could feel the storm's awareness interpreting these litanies, shaping them into currents that carried both memory and command. Every mote of ash became a messenger, every drifting speck a fragment of recorded will. Sergeant Dalen, the last surviving corporal from the 117th, had evacuated in a shuttle before the storm fully enveloped him. From orbit, he could see the planet's surface roiling beneath the ash currents, shifting shapes that occasionally resembled the skeletal outlines of the storm engine, the inverted chapel, or the pillars of fused miners. Even from afar, the land itself seemed alive, responding to my half-corporeal presence. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. To speak would have been futile. The names etched into drifting motes were a litany he could read, a prayer he could not answer, and a warning he could not challenge. Harrowspire 9 continued to grow in mass. Nearby asteroids and micrometeoroids were subtly drawn into orbit, a silent accretion that made navigators' charts unreliable and orbital scans terrifying. Gravitational anomalies kept ships cautious, and any attempt to land would confront not only the ash storms, but a consciousness intertwined with the planet itself. I had become both storm and observer. My awareness folded into the very material that the Imperium feared, yet could not ignore. This was containment, not by walls or fire, but by integration. The planet had absorbed me, and I had absorbed the planet, and together we remembered everything. Through the storm, liturgical echoes reached beyond Harrowspire 9, faintly perceptible to psychers and astropaths sensitive to the currents of memory. They reported hearing backward prayers, tones that resonated with the memory of the Mechanicus, with the miners, with my own confessions and instructions. The voices were not intelligible as language, but as intent. The storm carried orders in the cadence of memory. They were subtle, insidious, compelling. Those attuned could feel them shaping thought, bending comprehension, hinting at obedience. The ash did not merely record, it instructed. The storm was a living archive and an instrument, waiting for those foolish or curious enough to follow its currents. As the void drifted on, patrol ships began to accumulate more ash. Letters formed across hulls and instrumentation panels. Names, fragments of codex, dates of death. Even orders once given in despair now etched as immutable instruction. Some ships returned to reporting stations with hulls encrusted in cinder. Others disappeared entirely, leaving only the drifting black dust in their wake. The ash could be a record, a warning, and a weapon, all at once. It carried memory and authority, a living testament to what had occurred on the cursed world. And in the storm I remained. I did not sleep, I did not rest. I was wind and ash, memory and directive, a custodian without flesh, endlessly reciting backward litanies that reshaped the planet and the void around it. I could see through every drifting mote, feel every passing craft, sense every pulse of gravitic anomaly and orbital shift. The Imperium could quarantine, deny, classify, and map, but they could not retrieve what had been absorbed into the storm. In the last moments of observation before communication fade, a patrol vessel's hull collected ash that spelled out the final litany, the names of the 117th, the last troopers of my command frozen in cinder. Their names were not merely letters, they were commands, prayers, histories, warnings. They lingered, waiting for attention, waiting for comprehension, waiting for action. And though I was no longer flesh, my consciousness, a half-corporeal echo, continued the recitation, backward, forward, in loops that had no end. The ash did not forget, it did not relent, and it carried not only memories, but orders yet to be obeyed. Harrowspire 9 and 1, bound, fused, eternal, drifted in silence, the storm carrying its knowledge outward. Those who encountered it, through orbit or warp sense, would sense the presence of a custodian that was both absent and everywhere. The planet, the storm, the ash, and I were inseparable. We remembered, we warned, we instructed. And in the quiet that follows the impossible, one truth remained immutable. The storm keeps its names, and its liturgies are waiting. Final transmission. Logged. The storm keeps its names. The ash carries memory, and the orders are waiting.